What do 30 young girls living around the world have in common with one another? What do they do in their free time? What are their favorite subjects in school? What are their hopes and dreams for the future? These are the questions that journalist and author Masuma Ahuja set out to answer in her new book, Girlhood, an adaptation of her series for the Lilly, previously published by the Washington Post.
I went to the Lilly and said, hey, I have an idea of doing a series, which is like the opposite of news, basically, where I just want to hand over the reins to girls and let them tell their own stories.
The book focuses on the individual experiences of young girls in their everyday lives, beyond the limited scope of stories we see in the media, beyond the rich and famous, beyond tragedy. Who are the girls that might otherwise never be heard?
Everything I read painted girlhood in a way that didn't feel real. There was either one side was like all the horrors, or the other side was like, this is what influencers live like, which is very like celebrity culture type stuff. And the vast in between, where most girls exist, where I existed as a girl, just wasn't anywhere to be found.
Pulling from diary entries and pictures of girls around the world, Girlhood offers an inside look at the everyday heartbreaks, aspirations, trepidations, and pure joys of being a teenage girl, giving a unique perspective to the power of girlhood. Welcome, Masuma Ahuja. Today we're going to be talking about your book, Girlhood. First of all, the book was amazing. I thought it was such a great way to write something that relates to so many girls, and just reading it, it was really comforting to see that I'm not the only one going through these things. And I know there was one girl, Amia, she was like, oh, like people touch my curly hair all the time. And it was like, that's something that I deal with on a daily basis. So it was just really, really great getting to see that. I just want you to tell me about how this started and how the Lilly led to writing your book now.
Yeah, well, first, thank you so much for your kind words. And I'm so glad that the book, like some parts of the book resonated with you. That is like my hope and dream, that everyone who picks up the book feels seen a little bit on some of the pages at least. So I'm a journalist. That's my background. I worked in big newsrooms for the early part of my career. And then what ended up like leading into this book was I had grown up between continents. I was born and raised in India and moved to the US when I was a kid. And then I came to England for college and so lived bouncing around between different parts of the world. And I just didn't feel like stories about other places were reflected in anything I was reading anywhere. And so I put my life into storage, like moved into a storage unit, packed one suitcase, started like traveling and telling people stories. And the types of stories that editors always wanted and like we see in the news is just generally stories about, especially when you're talking about girls' lives, are stories about gender-based violence, about the horrors girls face in different places, things like child marriage and sexual violence, trafficking, which are really important stories to tell. But those were the only stories I was reading. And the conversations I was having with girls were very that was part of their lives sometimes, but there was so much more to it. And I didn't see that anywhere. And that was the stuff that I always wanted growing up, because I totally did not feel seen by anything I read growing up. And I had longed for books where I could read the book and be like, oh, that's totally what I'm going through. And it's nice to know that someone else out there feels this way. So I went to the Lilly and said, hey, I have an idea of doing a series, which is like the opposite of news, basically, where I just want to hand over the reins to girls and let them tell their own stories. And we did that. And that was 12 girls from 10 different countries. And as that series got going, we realized that there was just so much more. 12 girls from 10 countries is nothing, right? It's not nothing, it's a lot, but also it's far from enough. And I didn't feel done with it. And so we decided to make a book, which is this book now, Girlhood. There are 30 girls from 27 different countries in here who get to tell their own stories in their own words using diary entries and photos.
Can you tell me more about the Lilly and how it led to the creation of your book?
Yeah, so the Lilly is a platform published by the Washington Post, which is stories about women around the world, and they focus a lot on creating stories in different platforms. And I went to them with this idea of curating a series of girls' diary entries and girls' stories from around the world. And we did a pop-up newsletter and Instagram posts and basically put it out on the internet, where we had 12 girls from 10 different countries share their stories. And after that series came the book. So the book was very much born out of that series.
What got you interested in telling these stories?
I think being a former girl myself, that's the honest answer. Is just growing up, I never saw stories about people like me reflected in things I was reading. And as an adult and as a journalist who has some power in how stories are shaped and told, I wanted to tell girls' stories or give girls spaces to tell their own stories, because it just felt like everything I read painted girlhood in a way that didn't feel real. There was either one side was like all the horrors, or the other side was like, this is what influencers live like, which is very like celebrity culture type stuff. And the vast in between, where most girls exist, where I existed as a girl, just wasn't anywhere to be found. And on the other side of it, it was also a little bit of, a lot of like travel shows we all have access to, where you get to see the world like through a Lonely Planet guide or through someone on TV going to a new place. There are very rarely do you see women in those spaces or girls in those spaces. Like, you don't get to see what an ordinary person's life looks like and what a girl's life looks like. You'll generally have a man standing outside saying, oh, girls here don't get to go to school that often, and that's the extent of it. And I just wanted to know what the world looks like when we see it through girls' eyes.
How did you begin getting into this work? Like, how did you get into journalism?
I I think I was in my high school paper, and in college I started a magazine because I didn't like the college paper, which is like a weird separate story of my friend and I were like, oh, we were both international students and went to college in England, and there were lots of international students, and we were both like, oh, there's a lot of people here who come from different places, clearly have interesting stories to tell about the places where they live, where they spend their holidays and go home to, and we don't see that anywhere. And then when I graduated from college, I thought maybe I won't become a journalist because that's what everyone expects of me. But it's the best job, and that like I applied for all these other jobs, and the journalism jobs were the ones I always ended up wanting to apply for and wanting to spend time with, because you just get to ask questions for a living. Like, what could be more fun? So I started out, as like an assistant, and worked my way up into spaces where I got to have a little bit of power in shaping how stories were told. Yeah, that was how I got into this.
And what made you decide to switch over from producing and reporting for larger news platforms to curating your type of journalism that you have right now?
So newsrooms, when you're in a newsroom and where you're covering news, like you're kind of tied to the pace of what's happening in the world, and you're tied to going from headline to headline and from big story to big story. And I really wanted to slow down and spend time with stories and spend time with people to get to know them and to be able to tell their stories in a more nuanced way. And also, when you're working in a newsroom, you don't get to collect diary entries from girls around the world. Like, that's just not what ends up happening, because this kind of work is generally like something you have to push back a lot to make space for in newsrooms, because we tend to focus on like headlines, which are, this is an event that happened, or this is a thing that is happening in a place, let us tell this story, as opposed to, this is how people live, let's just explore what that looks like.
Now that you've spoken with so many girls and women around the world, what are some of the things that you've learned from them?
A thing that I've learned, which is maybe not an answer people expect, is that we are so similar in so many ways. There's so much that's different about, our countries, our cultures, our circumstances. Like, living in St. Louis might be very different from like a Mia, the girl in London, or a girl in the book of Mongolia or Cambodia. But we all also stay up nights worrying about the same types of things. It might not be the exact same thing, but generally you're concerned about your future or the people in your life. People care a lot about the friends they have and the people they love, their families. People Girls care a lot about that. Everyone in this book has such big dreams and such big aspirations and so much they want to do. Also, we all tend to have like the same curriculum wherever we go to school, where people read the same books. People like and dislike the same books for the most part. A thing that I loved is like Halima, one of the girls who was in the Lilly series and in the book as well. She lives in Mazar-e Sharif, a city in northern Afghanistan, and she's this like fierce women's right advocate, and she teaches English classes, and there's a photo in the book which is just wonderful where it's her in front of like a room of boys teaching them, and she loves Celine Dion. And I love that because I don't know, I loved Celine Dion growing up, and there's something in common there. So a lot of like the stuff of just like what our days look like and the texture of our days is very similar wherever you are. And also the pressures we all face are very similar, both in terms of what what society tells us a girl should look like and should be, and what like a good girl is, and you know, the expectations that are placed on us about how ambitious we should or shouldn't be, how much we should or shouldn't achieve, like what we're expected to do as we grow up, and then the ways in which girls also want to push back against that.
Masuma, is there one a particular story that really resonated with you and that really like just hit you harder than any of the other ones?
The cop out answer is that every story resonated with me, which is also true, and I felt very seen in like I turned to the girls for advice even now as an adult, where like I read through this book sometimes when I'm feeling down, like when Sophie wrote for example about like stress and pressure about applying to college and feeling like the vast unknown in front of her. I related to like my past self related to that, and also my present self relates to that a lot even now. There are girls who write about a few of the girls left home, moved far away, either to cities away from home or to other countries, and write a lot about like homesickness and being far away from their families, where I live on another continent from my loved ones, and I relate to that a lot and like turn to them for advice about just like how do you get through it, and is it worth it, and how do you stick with it. Some of the girls wrote about, you know, the importance of like sticking with things when it seems like all the cards are stacked against you, and you have to just like power through and keep going because you have no choice, which I turned to inspiration. So really it's like every girl wrote about something that I felt so seen by, and I turn to at different points to go back and remind myself of like why I've done this and why it matters. And I hope that everyone who reads the book also feels similarly. It's just like, I've never been to St. Louis. I've never been to like most of the places in this book. And at the same time, I feel like I know people there, and I feel like I relate to people in these places.
Masuma, how did you choose these girls and what was the process of communicating with them and finding them?
It really varied. I met some girls, you know, I reached out to basically every person I've ever met in my life. And sometimes it was like a, hey, we had coffee 4.5 years ago. Remember me? You said you had a cousin who lived in this country. Could you put us in touch, please? Sometimes it was reaching girls like one of the girls, Alejandra, in Argentina. She's a soccer player. And I found her through a girls' soccer club in Buenos Aires. Claudia, the girl in the cover, she's the one in the Wonder Woman surf suit. I found her, she lives in Vanuatu in the Pacific Islands, and I found her through the Vanuatu Surf Association. Um, the girl in Mongolia, which I like totally did not expect to be connected to someone. Sadegul, she's the daughter of nomadic herders, and her parents move with the seasons. And there was like no way I would have ever expected to be connected to someone like her. And I reached out to an organization that worked with young people in Ulaanbaatar, the capital city of Mongolia, and said, hey, this is what I'm doing. Do you know of any girls who might be interested in participating? So it really varied from girl to girl, and also like contact varied, where some people, you know, I was on the phone with from time to time. Some people it was all on email. Some people, like one of the girls, Rukai in Baghdad, she and I text or we're on Facebook Messenger, and she messaged, like she didn't really do diary entries. She would message me at the end of every day, and so I would just get like messages from her, and that's how we stay in touch even now, where she'll like send me selfies from time to time. There's some people who like I'm in touch with on Instagram solely, and we just like DM each other all the time. And for some girls, it was we didn't speak the same language, and I was going through someone. Everything was always translated into the language that girls were most comfortable in. But sometimes I was going through someone like an adult in their life who they knew, who would be the in between, and communication would go through them. So it varied really.
Have you ever thought about Well, a lot of these girls don't speak English, like you mentioned. Have you ever thought about publishing the book in other languages?
That is the hope and dream. The hope and dream is very much that this book will be published in all the languages and get to every country in the world. Like that's my dream. And when we decided to do this book, the publisher and I talked a lot about like how can this book exist in translation? You know, this is something that we really want to get to girls everywhere because everyone should like everyone in these countries should be able to read this book as well.
We actually have one of the girls from the book here today, and her name is Sophie Chappell, and she's also from St. Louis, just like me. Sophie, would you like to introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about how you got involved in this project?
Yeah. So hi, I'm Sophie Chappell. Like Sandra said, I'm also from St. Louis. And Masuma knew, she was in contact with someone I knew growing up, Rachel Shalom, who is a journalist, and she's worked at other magazines such as like the Wall Street Journal and things like that. And so Rachel was in contact with Masuma, and I guess like they had kind of talked about, like the different Lilly articles. And I think Rachel mentioned my name, and then, I got an email from Masuma just saying, hey, would you want to be part of this project? And that was when I was a junior in high school, and now I'm a freshman in college. And so it's been really cool, not only like seeing, it's been so amazing seeing the other girls, but it's kind of been cool knowing like we've all been growing up like as this book has been going on as well. And it's kind of cool to reflect on like who I was during like that first piece, and then who I am now. And so that's just been really fun.
What do you think is one of the biggest things that you've gained from being a part of this project?
Honestly, just like being able to show other girls kind of like who I am in like a raw, like in kind of a raw sense, because like you guys both said, I didn't get a lot of that growing up either. A lot of times, like with social media, I saw this kind of like picture perfect, lifestyle. And then like the article that I was a part of, I was writing diary entries about like how I was so scared about college and like getting into college and things like that. And so I think like one of the biggest takeaways that I've learned is just, again, like how similar we all are and how it's so important to like use your voice to share your story, because you never know like how, like you never know how similar it could be to someone else's. So.
What do you think of the book? Like, what was your first impression when you got it and you saw yourself in there?
I have not gotten it yet. I think it's still, yeah, I think it's still on its way to me. But I don't know. I don't know. I'm just so excited to see like not only myself, but all the other girls too. And just again to see like how similar we all are, even though we're from different parts of the world. And I think it's cool that we can like see pieces of each other in every country. So yeah, that's what I'm looking forward to.
After being a part of this experience and just being able to see all these different stories, what do you want other girls to know about girlhood and your experience with it?
Yeah. So I think one thing is like everything, like one thing I want girls to know is everything you feel like is valuable, and all your feelings should be validated. Because like again, you're not alone. And so I think a lot of times we all just feel so like ensconced in our own little bubble, and we just feel so isolated and far away from everyone, when in reality, like, like Masuma and you, Sandra, have been talking about, like, we're all very similar. And so I think like just again, that everything you're feeling, someone else has felt before, and like you're not alone. And I know it's something that's said so often, but that was one thing like I learned a lot throughout this project as well, was like these girls were facing similar issues as me, um and like we were thousands of miles apart. And so yeah, again, it's just kind of that network of people who are the same as you. So
Yeah, I totally agree, especially right now during COVID, that isolation feeling is really, really strong. And again, being able to read about these experiences and see that I'm not alone in a lot of these things was just really great. Masuma, can you tell us a little bit about what's next for you, what about the digital platform and all that?
Yeah, so 30 girls, as wonderful as they all are, including you, Sophie, and your copy of the book is on its way. Um, 30 girls is just 30 girls, right? And there's so many more girls out there and so many more stories to tell. And I realized that I didn't feel done with this when I finished putting together the book, in part because I had so many more stories just sitting on my computer and, you know, in like texts with girls in different places. And a thing that I realized from talking to a lot of girls in different places was very few girls, I definitely didn't have this growing up, very few girls have access to any place that tells them that their voice and their story matters. And the things that they're thinking about every day is interesting and is important. For me, at least, and for a lot of people I've talked to, the two of you can tell me if it's true for you. Growing up English class or whatever language you end up learning in classes, you analyze the thoughts of authors. You don't often have the space to express how you're feeling and what you're going through and how you're making sense of the world around you. And that especially, like, that gap grows as you move out of places where people have access to good schools and where education setup is like strong. So I really want to create spaces for growth, basically, and I'm launching a media venture and I have a pilot program going right now where one arm is storytelling workshops for girls around the world, girl being inclusive term here, and age ranges, you know, all the way from like 11 to girls in their 20s, just basically a space to give girls the tools to tell their own stories, working with mentors who do storytelling in all different ways. And on the other side, actually, you know, mentoring girls, staying with them through a period of time, cultivating their talent, investing in them, and giving them a platform then to publish their work. So any girl who feels like she has something to say, which every girl does, has a place to go and learn how to tell her stories, and people who work with her to help get her stories out into the world. So all of us can feel more seen when we read stories on the internet. And also every girl has spaces she can go to when she feels like she has something to say.
I completely agree. You know, growing up in Egypt and as a young Egyptian girl, I was always taught to, you know, never bring attention to yourself, always be humble, always like try not to be the life of the party. And just, I think it's really important to switch that perspective and then be like, no, I am important. My opinions are important. And I think you're doing such great work. Thank you so much, Masuma and Sophie, for being here today. I've had a really great time listening to all of this information.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're both so happy to be here.
You can purchase this book now at Novel Neighbor or on their website.